Here's a question. If you asked 10 people in this industry whether hairdressing is dying or thriving, you'd get 10 confident answers. And about half of them would be completely sure it's collapsing, and half would be completely sure that the doom-mongers are just after a tax cut. They can't both be right. And it turns out, when you actually go and pull the official numbers, not press releases, not lobbying submissions, the actual ONS and HMRC data, neither one of them's right. There's a third answer. It's less dramatic than either, and it's the one nobody's been telling you. I'm Andrew Cleland, 20 years in this industry, salon owner, wholesaler. For the last few years I've been doing something that apparently nobody else in the sector's trade bodies is, reading the actual data before repeating the headline. This is Salon Logic, and this is first episode is the foundation for everything else we're going to do on this show. Because before we get into who's saying what and who's misquoting which select committee report, you need to understand the one thing that's actually true. So let's get into it. Excuse me. So here are the two stories. Story one, the sector is collapsing. This is the British Hair Consortium story, and it's built on a report from CBI Economics that says employment is going to fall by 93% by 2030. 93%. It says apprenticeships will hit zero by 2027. And it says the sector's losing £2.4 billion a year to the Exchequer. It's presented in select committee evidence. It's in the press. It's a story you'll have heard if you follow any of the big trade bodies. Story two is the reaction to story one. It says that the collapse narrative is nonsense, which, as we'll get into, it is. And therefore, there's no real problem at all. This is just a lobbying campaign dressed up as a crisis looking for a VAT cut it doesn't deserve. So I want to tell you clearly, right at the start of this show, story two is also wrong. And dismissing it that easily does a real disservice to salon owners who are genuinely struggling with their margins right now. I've read dozens of actual written submissions from real salon owners to the Business and Trade Committee this year. People with 2, 3, 4 locations. People have trained apprentices for 20 years. And their struggle is real, even where the big trade body numbers attached to it are garbage. So neither story survives contact with the evidence. What does? Here's the truth, and it's actually simpler than either of the two false stories, which is probably why nobody's been shouting about it. The sector hasn't been squeezed by a dying market. It's been squeezed by one very specific, very measurable thing. Labour costs have risen roughly twice as fast as the prices salons have actually been able to charge. Let me give you 3 numbers. Write these down because we're going to come back to them again and again on this show. So number 1, the national minimum now living wage for an adult. 2009, it was £5.80 an hour. Today, as of April past, £12.71. That's a rise of 119%. Number 2, the actual ONS price index for hairdressing services specifically, it's a series D7EY if you want to look it up yourself, and you should, because that's the whole point of the show, is to, get you thinking about the proper data. In 2009, that index sat at 88.6. As of May this year, 149.7. That's a rise of 69%. Number 3, and this one's going to surprise you, some of you. Turnover per employee across the whole sector. 2009, it was £35,479. In 2025, £37,847. A rise of just 6.7%. Now sit with those 3 numbers for a second. 119%, 62%, and 6.7%. The first thing people ask when you tell them that salons are struggling is, well, have they even tried putting their prices up? And the honest answer from that middle number is yes. Hairdressing prices are up 69% since 2009. That's actually faster than general UK inflation over the same period, which has been somewhere around 55 to 60% cumulative. This is not an industry that's failed to pass its costs on to the customer. Here's a way to think about that in a way that it actually lands with you. A £30 haircut, a £30 wash, cut and blow dry in 2009 would need to cost £50.70 today just to keep pace with what's happened to prices in this specific sector. Now, plenty of salons are above that line and plenty aren't, and that's worth sitting with too, because it means that a chunk of the industry has been quietly eating real cost increases rather than passing them on. And here's the mechanism. The wage floor rose 119%. Prices rose 69%. The wage floor is climbing at around 1.75 times the rate prices have. That's not a story about people not wanting to pay their haircuts. It's not a story about lazy pricing. It's the story about one input cost rising structurally faster than the price a service business can charge for a haircut. Every single year for 15 years running, no matter what government's in power or what any one budget does. And that's exactly why a VAT cut on its own doesn't fix anything. Say that the industry gets it. Great, for about 12 months. You've got some breathing room. And then next April, the wage floor goes up again and you're right back where you started. It's a painkiller. It's not actually treating what's wrong. And here's a number, here's where it gets a genuinely interesting number. And it's the bit that almost nobody's talking about, including myself until I sat down with the arithmetic. If prices are up 69% since 2009, but turnover per employee is only up 6.7%, those two facts can only be true together one way. The amount of revenue per person in the payroll is generating has fallen. A lot. Almost 37% once you do the maths properly. Now I want to be really careful with you about what that number actually means, because it's really easy to overtell this story and I'm not going to do that in this show. Revenue per employee is measured against everyone in the payroll, not just the stylist holding the scissors. It's actually a completely standard business metric. Years ago, credit reference agencies like Gradon used to report this exact pairing on business credit reports, revenue per employee and profit per employee side by side as a shorthand for how efficiently the whole staff structure is converting into output. It's not a flaw in the number, it's the point of it. Every wage in the books, the stylists, the apprentices, whoever's in the front desk, all of that gets paid out of the revenue that the business brings in. So revenue per person paid is a real legitimate thing to track. What is not is a claim that any one specific hairdresser is personally doing a third of your haircuts in 2009. That's a translation I need to walk back from on an earlier version of this script, if I'm honest with you, because that's overclaiming what an all rolls average can actually tell you about one person's individual client list. But I still want to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about, because a raw percentage doesn't really land if, and this is a big if, the entire gap were concentrated purely on a stylist client volume, with none of it coming from the things I'm about to walk through. It would look like a stylist going from 30 clients a week to about 19. I'm not telling you that's what's actually happened to any one person. I'm telling you that's the size of the number, so that you've got something to picture. The real explanation almost certainly isn't that concentrated in one place. It's spread across several things at once. And I want to head off one thing right now, because somebody's going to try it. Somebody's going to say this figure's just diluted by all the apprentices dragging the average down. And here's the problem with that. The exact same people telling you apprenticeships are collapsing to basically zero can also tell you that apprentices are diluting this ratio. If apprentice numbers are really falling off a cliff, they're a shrinking share of the workforce, not a growing one. They can't be responsible for a gap that's widened over time. You can't have it both ways. Now, if instead someone points at receptionists or other support staff, and that's a different conversation, and it doesn't run into that same contradiction, but it changes what the actual complaint is. Carrying support staff is a completely legitimate business decision. You're allowed to have a receptionist. What you're not entitled to do is to carry that cost without pricing to cover it and then blame VAT when the number doesn't add up. Here's the thing about VAT. It was never your money to begin with. It sits on top of whatever you actually charged, collected on the government's behalf. So if you're going to tell me that your VAT bill ate all your profits, you haven't described a tax problem. You've described a pricing decision that never covered your full cost base, support staff included, in the first place. That's exactly why I gave you that £1 a minute chair time rule earlier. VAT doesn't create a shortfall that wasn't already there. It just turns up at the point in your accounts where an existing pricing gap becomes impossible to hide from. The £90,000 threshold genuinely is a cliff edge. And that's a real fair complaint. VAT ate my profit is a completely different claim, and it's usually your own pricing that put you in the position to say it, not the tax system. The honest version is this. The business overall is generating less revenue per person on its books relative to how fast wages and prices have moved. And there are at least 3 genuine different reasons that could be true at once. Business fragmentation. The number of selling businesses has grown by around 98% since 2009, way outpacing growth in the actual client base. So more premises and more chain renters are splitting the same pool of customers. Falling visit frequency. Cost of living pressure means that people are stretching out to 10 weeks between appointments instead of 8, and genuine overcapacity in parts of the market, given business counts nearly doubled against a client base that hasn't. Any one of those would produce exactly this pattern. Untangling which one matters most needs data on chair occupancy, on visit frequency, that frankly doesn't exist in any public data set right now. That's the actual analytical work a root and branch restructuring conversation would need, and it's a much harder, much more useful question than what VAT rate should apply. I'll give you 2 real examples because I think they illustrate the range better than any national average. One salon I looked at averages close to £4,500 a month per employee right now. Another average is closer to 7,500. Same industry, same year, more than double the spread, which tells you the national picture is flattening out a huge amount of real variation. And there's one more, because I want this show to correct itself in real time when the evidence says to. A different salon's own records comparing 2019 to 2026, same number of staff, different people in the seats, average revenue per employee went from £3,260 to £4,000. That's a nominal rise of nearly 23%. Sounds like good news, and on the face of it, looks like a real counterexample to the national picture. But UK prices rose by more than 20% just in the 2021 to 2023 inflation spike alone, on top of ordinary inflation either side of it. Once you account for that, this salon's real inflation-adjusted revenue per employee it's roughly flat. Not falling, the business is holding its own, which, given the national picture, is genuinely notable, but not clearly rising either. I'd have loved to tell you this one salon proves the doom narrative wrong. The honest answer is it proves this one salon is doing okay. That's worth something, but it's not the same thing. I want to flag something else to you, because this is where I think a lot of well-meaning analysis, including, if I'm honest, an earlier draft of my own work, I've gone over this a few times, gets ahead of itself. There are at least 3 more factors sitting underneath that 37% number, and none of them show up in the official statistics at all. 1. Service mix has shifted. A full day of colour correction now takes the chair time that 3 cut and blow dries used to. Fewer appointments doesn't mean less work. It can just mean each appointment eats a bigger chunk of the day. Here's a rule of thumb worth knowing. Charge out should be a minimum of £1 per minute of chair time before product and VAT. 45-minute cut should be £45 minimum, and that actually sits almost exactly on the current average of UK average of £48. But a 4-hour colour correction should be £240 minimum on the same basis. And I'd bet real money that a lot of salons are pricing that job as a scaled-up version of their old 2-hour job, not against the actual time it eats. That's a bigger threat to your margin than anything in the VAT debate, and it's entirely within your own control to fix. 2. A chunk of this work happens completely outside what the official data can even see. If you're renting a chair in someone else's salon, the official turnover figure only captures the rent that the salon receives from you, not your own client revenue. So the real volume of work happening across the whole self-employed end of the market is understated, and it's understated specifically at the more specialist, higher value end. 3. This cuts the other way. Portfolio careers. Someone teaching 2 days a week and doing client work 3 days a week counts as a full person in employment figures, but they're not delivering full-time capacity. That alone would drag the average down with zero connection to any real decline in demand. So, and I want to be really honest about this because credibility on this show depends on it. I can't tell you exactly how much of that 37% is a real capacity problem and how much is a measurement artefact of an industry that's genuinely changed shape. Nobody can with the data that currently exists. The honest position is a range, not a single number. Anyone who tells you they know the precise figure is selling you something. So let's ground this, because I don't want anyone walking away from this episode thinking I've just told you the sector's in free fall through the back door. Two things are hard to argue against. First, turnover and business count have both grown consistently since 2009. Turnover's up 57.4% in nominal terms. 3.8 billion to 6.1 billion. Business count's up close to 100%. That's not what a shrinking market looks like. Second, and this one's subtler, the ONS tracks how much weight hairdressing and personal grooming carries in the overall basket of what UK consumers spend money on. That weight has stayed remarkably steady, and I've put this into the data site. It's remarkably steady for nearly 40 years, sitting around 7 to 8 parts per thousand in the late 80s, and it's back around there today after moving up and down in between. If the sector were in genuine long-term decline as a share of what people spend their money on, that line would be sloping down, and it isn't. One more thing before we wrap, because it's the other headline claim you'll hear constantly, that apprenticeships are heading to zero by 2027. So the government commissioned its own review into this, the Milburn Review, looking at why youth unemployment is so high across the whole economy, not just this sector. And its diagnosis doesn't mention VAT once. It points to a botched 2016 reform of the apprenticeship funding system, the disappearance of entry-level jobs generally, and rising employment costs making it harder to take someone on who isn't yet fully productive. That's the same wage cost mechanism that we've spent this the whole episode on, just showing up on the hiring side instead of the pricing side. But here's the thing, the actual data, at least through 2023-24, shows recovery from a trough, not a march to zero. English apprenticeship starts in hairdressing bottomed out around 6,340 in 2022-23 and came back up to 7,350 the year after. It's a growth of nearly 16% in one single year. Still well below the 2015 peak, but the direction is up and not down to nothing. I'll say this plainly because it matters how you judge everything else in this show. There's more recent data for 24-25 on a slightly broader category that does show a fall. I haven't fully reconciled those two data sets yet. Until I have, I'm telling you that clearly, rather than picking whichever one suits the story I want to tell you. So here's where that leaves us. There's no aggregate collapse. The numbers in business count and turnover are resilient. Some of them are at record highs. A real, measurable structural gap between wage costs and prices that's been running for around 15 years and doesn't care who's in government. An apparent fall in real output per head that's partly real and partly an artefact of an industry that's genuinely restructured itself. And we don't have the data to say exactly how much is which. And a VAT cut that would treat none of this properly because resets every April and says nothing at all about why volume's fallen. That's the truth. It's less dramatic than we're all doomed, and it's less comfortable than nothing to see here. But it's what the numbers actually say. And every single figure I've given you today, I can show you the source for. So next time on the show, we're going to look at what happens when a trade body's own written evidence to a select committee contradicts itself in the same document, 2 paragraphs apart. That one's going to make you laugh before it makes you angry. I'm Andrew Cleland. This has been Salon Logic. Go and check the numbers yourself. The sources are in the show notes. Every time, always. See you next episode.